Thank you so much for your time this evening, Koffi. With this meeting with President Putin in Moscow, what chances do you think the African Union delegation actually has of unlocking Russian and possibly Ukrainian exports of grains, fertilizers and other key items to Africa?
I think there's a great deal of chances. It's sort of quite surprising, but a well-received notion to see that the head of the African Union is involved in attempting to find peace and security in a conflict like that. It's almost not even, it's not regular, it's not common to see that. So it's a great opportunity. And Russia does have a great deal of interest about Africa. So this meeting is beyond providing, if you want, grain export to Africa as well. It goes beyond that. It's about energy, it's about geopolitics, and Africans are now positioning themselves as well through President Macky Sall, who's heading the African Union, to be able to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. And I think Africa is well positioned to do this because more and more Africa is becoming a place where, in fact, most countries, at least the powers, are looking at a sort of rescramble for Africa. And in that rescramble, there are two things very important. The first one is the vote, the African vote at the United Nations. And then the second one is basically the energy and natural resources that most of these great powers are looking for. So there's a great chance of Africa at least playing a role of peacemaker.
Well, it's quite interesting you talk about this re-scramble for Africa. When it comes to this meeting, it's clear why the African Union decided on this meeting, but what's in it for Russia? And how important is this meeting essentially for the two parties concerned?
There's a great deal of it for Russia. If you look at it, Russia, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has lost a great deal of international, if you want, power, soft power, as well as hard power. And since 1991, it's now the Russian Federation has sort of inherited that. And so Russia needs to rebuild that reputation. And Russia is coming. If you remember, in 2019, Russia, as a sort of newcomer to the African continent, at least in modern time, has organized a Sochi gathering where you had 35 African presidents were there who really went for business with, on the invitation of President Putin. It was a great and successful meeting. And from there on, we've seen that Russian trade with Africa has grown by more than 350%. And Russia wants to push for that again. Russia next to China, and next to Europe, and next to the US. So the continent is a new prize. Now, I've mentioned the idea that beyond grain, there's energy and natural resources, but also security. There's a great deal. Russia is one of the top, if you want, arms sellers to Africa. That's a big area of business for Russia. And so Russia can play a big role. In fact, if you, what's happening now in the Central African Republic and Mali is something that we need to pay attention to. Russia is moving very closely to establishing its influence again on the African continent.
Now, of course, on the agenda in this meeting in Russia, we'll see the AU pushing for peace in Ukraine. So going back to what you mentioned about Africa as a possible peacemaker or playing that role of peacemaker, are you confident that when the African Union speaks as a united body, Russia will listen?
Yes, Russia will listen. In fact, one of the strategies that we haven't heard much about by observers and analysts is really they've dismissed the role of Africa. In fact, Russia's almost, it's not even a sneaky strategy, it's much more open now, that ultimately the real and main geopolitical battlefield in the world today, it will be Africa. And Russia wants a piece of that battlefield. And Russia is setting up itself already with the help, of course, with China. So making Africa a very important partner and player also helped Russia to expand and then grow its influence And that is a very important thing for Africa. So Africa will have to play that role as a peacemaker for first, of course, because the idea that you have to fight and go to war before peace is becoming difficult to accept by most Africans who've been there, who've gone through so much strife and wars, and they want peace rather than war.
And so if the African Union delegation actually does succeed in getting some concessions from President Putin, how is this likely to impact how the rest of the world is handling issues around the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Oh, very important. First of all, the first big win there will be for Africa, that finally, I know skeptics and cynics always say that, my goodness, you know, you have so many problems on the African continent. Why don't you establish peace here before you go somewhere else? Clearly, it makes sense. But wherever Africa can establish itself or play a role of peacemaker is always a powerful dividend for peace around the world. And I think that will come home as well. If Africa can establish that reputation with Russia, with China, as partners and as part of the BRICS nations, I think Africa can play a great role into that peace. And there will be dividend coming back. It's not just in grains and food and agriculture, but on a reputation of the African continent slowly building itself as a continent to play with.